This is the new TC Pride Podcast, episode 43, part one of on-location coverage of a special screening of Project Q with Sarah McPeck. TC Pride Podcast, we're on location at Lush in Minneapolis for the Big Fat Comedy Hour and a very special screening of the film Project Q, produced by Sarah McPeck, a local comic in the Twin Cities area here. And I'm here with the filmmakers. Could you please just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your art form?
Hi, I'm Lauren Hughes. I am the director and editor of Project Q. I'm also a printmaker and a disability arts advocate.
And I'm Tam Smith, and I did most of the videography work for Project Q.
So there's a story about how you all got involved with Sarah, the Craigslist story, right? So maybe you can tell folks a little bit how you got involved with Sarah, how you got involved with Project Q.
Sure, yeah. I've been doing a lot of videography through my day job, and got a brand new camera and was really excited to use it, and was just creeping on Craigslist, and I saw Sarah's ad looking for videographers for a queer documentary about artists in the Twin Cities, and it really struck a chord with me, and I asked Tam if I should reply, and she said yes, so that was good. And then I went and met Sarah at a Joe Sensors in Burnsville, which is probably the most random place you could meet someone, and we hit it off, and we just kind of followed Sarah on her journey through the Twin Cities queer art community.
Yeah, I think Lauren was a little bit hesitant to actually answer Sarah's ad. So I think I did a little bit of pushing, and it's like, yes, you should do this. This is actually weirdly coincidental that you wanted to start doing kind of more independent video stuff, and Sarah had this ad. So I thought it was really good opportunity for us to just dive right in.
You actually did a really great job of covering sort of a really sort of broad stretch of the queer community in the Twin Cities. So, I mean, even being from the Twin Cities, I mean, it was great. I learned a lot. But for people outside of the Twin Cities area, like what would you tell people? Maybe some things that you learned personally in your journey of making the film, or just in general about the queer arts community in the Twin Cities?
Yeah, it's a really rich. It's very diverse. When we started working with Sarah, she kind of had this idea of featuring artists from the Twin Cities and also herself, and kind of putting her personal story in there. But we didn't have a real clear kind of point A to B narrative. So we just kind of dove in and started with all of these interviews. So we got to meet, drag performers and musicians, spoken word artists, aerialists, just really, it was a great variety, comedians, so I feel like I learned a lot about the richness of the community. What do you think, Tam?
Yeah, I think when we started off, Sarah had a core group of folks that she was really interested in featuring in the film, and we kept adding people because we're like, let's talk about this part of the queer arts community, and we need to have this person represented, and that kind of, I think, made it expand more to, just more inclusive and more people, and kind of showcasing a little bit more of the diversity that's happening here in the Twin Cities.
I know I've talked to a lot of people just out in the course of making the podcast, and I've discovered that it's actually a really large and growing community. Where would you see, just sort of from your perspective, the community going in the next over the next few years?
Yeah, I don't know. That's tricky. I feel like there's so much going on, and I feel like we kind of were viewing it from like that queer perspective and lens. I feel like there's just so much going on. It's growing in any way that any arts community is. It's pretty integrated into the larger arts community. Just continuing to expand.
Yeah, I don't know if I could predict how it would go necessarily, but I'd hope that would become even more diverse, in that more groups of people feel open to express themselves, especially with what's going on politically, and I hope that strengthens people to really speak out.
Yeah, I think it would be great to expand more into artists of color, and kind of the intersectionality of kind of the politics of feminism and queer politics, just kind of expanding to be more inclusive, even more inclusive, yeah.
Yeah, you did touch on something that kept coming up in the film. That there are a lot of queer artists that don't necessarily like want to identify maybe exclusively as queer artists. They want to be recognized as artists who maybe happen to be queer as part of their identity, right? So, how do you feel about that as filmmakers, as artists yourself?
I don't know. That's kind of a double-edged sword because it does make us unique as a marginalized group to identify and look for that core community. But you also want to be recognized just on the merit of your artwork. So, I don't know. The Twin Cities in general are pretty accepting community. So, I feel like the stark distinction between, queer art and not queer, it's kind of arbitrary. I don't feel like it's a necessity. So, yeah, I don't know. I take pride in being a queer artist and highlighting that, but it's different for everybody.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add to that besides I don't really necessarily like to see the separation so much. Like, it would be nice for people just to feel comfortable and in joining or participating in whatever community that they are interested in. So,
yeah, you did mention some current events that have taken place, right? Obviously, we can't avoid it. It seems like since as far back as there's been arts and politics, the two have sort of been inextricably intertwined, right? How do you think the current events that have taken place, I guess just broadly, have affected maybe the queer arts movement, or maybe just the arts movement in general? And how do you think the things that have been happening politically will continue to affect the queer arts or the arts community moving forward?
Well, it's definitely disturbing to see, looking to cut the NEA and a lot of arts funding nationally. I think Minnesota is so unique for the rich funding. There's a lot of funding for the arts, and that's very unique to Minnesota. That is one of the best things. I feel like being an artist in Minnesota is great, and cutting the funding to the NEA is alarming. But I also feel like a lot of people are kind of worked up and kind of going to get out there and fight, and so we'll see. It's hard to say. I feel like a lot of great art will be made in this time.
Kind of another double-edged sword, like you were talking about, right? So right. Try to make the best of sometimes bad situation, right? So.
Yeah. I think just talking about the National Endowment of the Arts, that I think that'll affect a lot of communities, and that's unfortunate. I don't know. Personally, it's hard to not be just very down and sad about what's going on, and you have to just find ways to lift yourself up, and I think the arts community has a great potential to help folks with that process, and hopefully people will just continue to strive to what they were always working towards, I guess, and I don't know. It's tough.
The pendulum will swing back, and we'll have lots of great art to show for it.
So where can people follow you online and follow your future projects?
Well, this is our first film. We're first-time filmmakers, and Sarah was the first-time filmmaker. So, we don't have a huge online presence as filmmakers.
Little Wonderland Productions, and then we have Facebook and a website. But yeah.
And you said you've been submitting the film to like different film festivals and stuff, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping we can get into some national film festivals and be able to highlight all the amazing art going on in the Twin Cities.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Maggie Ferris, and I'm a stand-up comic, and I have been doing stand-up comedy for 17 years.
17 years. So how did you get involved with stand-up?
I started doing comedy because my sister was a waitress at Acme Comedy Club, and so I would go down and hang out sometimes and watch the performers, and I always just thought, I'd like to give that a try, or I think I could do that, but then I did that, and it was much harder than it looks. I was horrible in the beginning, but for some reason I stuck with it, and I got better, a little better.
You told a story in the film that hopefully people, when they check out the film, they can kind of get a little bit deeper on the story. But you told a story about how when you first started, you actually did sort of experiment doing sort of like queer themed sort of content, and that didn't go so well right away, right?
Yeah, I feel like my first set I ever did was all queer jokes, and it wasn't that I was afraid of the material, but I bombed so bad I thought maybe that was because it was all queer jokes. So it took me a long time to kind of come back around and kind of do more gay stuff and be more inclusive of that kind of material instead of just jokes that have nothing to do with my sexuality or who I am,
Well, it seems to be going great for you now. How did you get involved with Sarah and with the project in general?
Well, Sarah does stand up, so I had seen her out and about on the scene, and she just asked me if I wanted to be part of it. So they came over and interviewed where I do my podcast, and then they came and filmed me do a set at Acme, and that was it. I mean, she didn't have to twist my arm too hard. It's a pretty fun opportunity to be showcased in that way, I think, Well, I think one thing that's great about the movie is you get to experience kind of a big slice of what the kind of diverse stuff we have to offer. And there's just so much going on, and I feel like the movie just scratches the surface. There's just so many areas of, dance and singing and visual arts and photography. I mean, there's just so much. It's just a really, I feel like the Twin Cities is just a really kind of culturally rich place, and within the queer community and within the arts community, there's little subsections, and I just think it's wonderful. You can't find it anywhere else,
And the film does a really great job of showing that it is so diverse, and there's just so many different art forms involved. The one thing that kind of comes up in the film too is that there are a lot of artists within the queer community who maybe don't necessarily want to be identified sort of exclusively as a queer artist, a queer painter, a queer comic. And I think you mentioned something about that in the film too.
I'm definitely in the same boat. I feel like I'm a comedian who happens to be gay, and I don't want to be. I mean, I mostly perform in front of just straight crowds and stuff like that. It's a lucky break when I get to do a show just in front of the queer community, and it doesn't happen very often. And I actually have to adjust my material a lot because I'm so used to playing in front of straight people that are just not maybe familiar with gay comics or comedians who happen to be gay.
Right. So, where do you see the community, or maybe the arts, the queer arts community going in the next few years? I mean, it sounds like you said. I mean, you have a unique experience where you perform, like you said, in a lot of places where you're not in front of queer audiences necessarily. It seems like maybe mainstream, quote unquote, audiences are maybe just sort of becoming more sort of accepting and open of queer artists in general, maybe you think?
Yeah, and I think coming up in this day and age, it's just such a different culture than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. People were persecuted and not out, and it was a really hard and different place, and now it's just so much more accepting, especially in the city. People from small towns can come to the city and just be themselves and explore those art forms and do what they're supposed to be doing instead of be so isolated and persecuted, because there's strength in numbers, most definitely. I think with how rich the community is here, it's a safe place for people.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about is that it's no secret that there have been a lot of current events that have happened lately that could potentially influence one way or the other the queer arts community, the queer movement in general. How do you think current events that have taken place over the last, I guess, year or so have affected the queer arts community and will continue to affect the arts community?
I feel like the arts will always be there. Like, I think there will always be a place for different voices and for voices to be heard, but I think our political culture right now is a little bit scary, and I probably see some funding getting dropped, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I think it's better in the city where there's more people on board with diversity and inclusion and stuff. but I don't know what's gonna. It's a very scary climate right now, I think, and I mean, I don't know. It makes me nervous, really, to think about it. I hope that it continues and it grows, and people get to do what they feel like doing and what they need to do to express themselves. But it's a little bit scary. I don't want any of our rights taken away, and you don't know. They might be. It's a little scary.
How can people follow you online? Where will you be performing? That kind of thing. How can people follow your work?
My website is Extreme Maggie with an E, extrememaggie.com, and then on all the social media, I'm Extreme Maggie as well, on the Twitter and Instagram. And I have a calendar on my website, and I post a lot of stuff on Facebook. I think my Facebook page is borderline fans of mediocre comedian Maggie Ferris, which is a mouthful, but there's a link to it on my website if you want to follow there. But yeah, I have all my info on there of where I'm performing and stuff.
Thank you so much for your time, and good luck with your work.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
The TC Pride Podcast has been a production of Podletter Media and Twin Cities Pride. Subscribe now on iTunes or Google Play and submit your first Pride story at myfirstpride.org.